to the crisis in the Middle East. The Israeli ambassador to the USA has revealed he is hopeful a deal for the release of a number of hostages will be reached in the coming days.
Well, this comes as Hamas gunmen battled Israeli forces on Sunday, trying to push into Gaza's largest refugee camp. Despite the fighting, US and Israeli officials said a deal to free some of the hostages held in the besieged enclave was edging yet closer.
Jotam Confino is in Tel Aviv for us this morning with his view on this. It looks as though it's not a case of if an exchange will happen, it's when, Jotam.
Absolutely. We hear for the first time both Qatar, Israel and the United States all saying the same thing, that we're very, very close to a deal. And this is quite new, to be honest, because Israel has really refrained on commenting on these negotiations. But we heard the Israeli ambassador to the United States say that it's very close and he expected it could happen within days. And of course, we also hear it in the media. The Egyptian media picked it up. Washington Post came with a relatively detailed description of what this deal and what's in it. And it's about 50 hostages, children and women, who are supposedly going to be released in exchange for a 5-day ceasefire. And they'll be released in batches. Every 24 hours, there'll be a new batch of hostages released. But we have to remember, everything can really collapse at the very last second. If Hamas decides to pull, or if Israel decides to pull, the deal is off and we'll be back to status quo.
What about this window of time, this 5-day ceasefire? Because this was the big fear about an extended break in hostilities. Is 5 days deemed to be too much?
For Israel, every day is too much. They want to systematically eradicate Hamas and pound Hamas as much as possible, but it knows that if it wants its hostages back, that's not possible. It needs to give Hamas some sort of a breathing room. And of course, this is good news for Hamas. Hamas will be able to regroup. It will be able to restock all of its things. It'll be ready for the second round of fight. And of course, fuel will also enter Gaza, aid will enter Gaza, and all of this is, of course, good news for Hamas. So it's a compromise for Israel. There's no way around it. If it was up to Israel, they would surrender unconditionally and they would release all hostages, but they're just not going to do that. We know that for a fact.
Can we talk about this footage that's been released over the weekend? People who are listening on the radio, you'll probably have seen this footage over the weekend, but it appears to show members of Hamas bringing in hostages on the 7th of October. And according to the IDF spokesperson, cars that were seen driving away from Israel were also seen at the scene of this Al-Shifa hospital. And this appears to confirm the theory that indeed Hamas, the terrorist organisation, have been using a hospital to hide and indeed to harbour these hostages. Tell us more about your analysis of that.
First of all, it's a bombshell revelation. The entire world was waiting for this footage, and everyone who's against Israel were quick to call Israel a liar when they only, quote unquote, only released the footage of weapons being hidden inside the Al-Shifa hospital. They were quick to call foul, to say that Israel was wrong and this big command center was not. It didn't exist. Now, Israel yesterday came with two different sets of footages. One of a drone that is looking at Al-Shifa before it enters the tunnel, 10 meter deep, and it's clearly a tunnel, obviously. The second footage that we saw was from inside the hospital, surveillance cameras with the time and the date saying 7th of October in the morning. And it allegedly shows two hostages, one from Thailand and one from Nepal, if I'm not mistaken. And also, of course, armed men inside the hospital. So if those two sets of evidence, if they can be verified by other countries and by international institutions, then Israel has really rested its case and it can justify what it's doing at Al-Shifa, because Hamas has violated international law to such an extent that Israel could argue that it's definitely reasonable for it to go in there, especially when hostages were held inside Al-Shifa.
OK, Jotam, with that, thank you very much indeed.